Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Stabbing, Eon of Obscenity, out January 30th on Century Media Records. This album has 11 tracks, 31 minutes in length, and this is the band's second full-length studio album. They are an American brutal death metal band. Now, from a design standpoint, this album understands exactly what the sound of the band is all about and what they wanted out of this record. And I say that because the length, the way the album comes across, it's definitely a result of its own sound, of its own nature. It's a very compact album. 11 songs, 31 minutes. The density of the sound, the brutality of the sound becomes so overwhelming at times that I don't think this album would be digestible by any listener, regardless if you're a huge fan of the genre or not, if it pushed the 40-45 minute mark. An album like this, an album that pushes the boundaries of what brutal death metal is all about, needs to be around that 30-minute mark in order for the listener to feel that brutality, to feel that heaviness, but at the same time be able to enjoy the experience, be able to enjoy the journey. That's exactly how this album is put together from a design standpoint. It really allows for the best elements of the record to come to the forefront, and also minimizes the fact that the album is not incredibly dynamic. The density of the sound, the heaviness of the sound takes a lot away from that ability of the album to be a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more fluid. Once you get into the sound, I already mentioned this is a very brutal sounding record, one that really pushes those boundaries of what brutal death metal is all about, and I feel like that was the idea behind this record. Turn everything all the way to 11, if you will, coming out of the debut record into the sophomore album, allowing this album to push the boundaries of the band, to push the boundaries of their own sound, and I feel like they hit the mark. If that was the goal was reached. This is a very brutal, heavy, demanding sounding album. The density of the sound on this record is definitely coming from the overall guitar sound, but also from the bottom end, the more bass sound of the drums. The two work really well together in order to create that density, in order to create that thickness, and in order to create the baseline of what everything is all about, either be the heaviness or the brutality of that same heaviness. That is one aspect of the sound. But the sound is not just sitting in that element, not just sitting in one single place. There is some movement up and down as far as the overall sound is concerned, and one of the elements that helps, or two of the elements I should say, that helps define that up and down movement are the same two elements that ground this record with that density at the bottom end, guitars and drums. If you look at the guitars, for example, there are some groovier elements as far as licks and riffs are concerned, and while they don't necessarily break away or minimize the brutality and heaviness of the sound and the experience that this record gives, it definitely softens the blow here and there, and it makes the album feel a little bit more rich as far as the guitar sound is concerned, not allowing every single element to be exactly the same and making things feel like there are a few more layers to peel, even though at the end of the day what you end up getting is a sense of consistency throughout the record on the bottom end of the sound, and even how the sound breaks away as far as the guitars are concerned to increase that sense of height or that sense of movement that the sound has throughout the entire album. But super consistent in terms of how it's executed, super consistent in terms of how it's presented, and also super consistent in terms of how it sounds to the listener. The drums, exactly the same thing. You're going to find the exactly same consistencies throughout the entire record, but then when you hear the lighter sound of the drums, or the sound that separates itself more from the drums, the snare sound, for example, the cymbals, those elements definitely feel a little bit dislocated from everything else that creates that heaviness and their density at the bottom end. This, once again, it helps the songs feel a little bit bigger. It makes the songs feel a little bit more audible, It's a lot easier to listen to a brutal record like this if there's at least some up and down movement in the sound and not everybody compacted in the exact same lanes. I think this is an aspect with the overall length of the record that adds playability to the album, and it allows them to push the boundaries of brutality as far as that heaviness is concerned, but still making an album that is easier. I was going to say easy, but it's not easy. It's easier to get into and perhaps easier to digest if you're sitting through it from first all the way to the last song. Once you get into the vocals, Bridget's performance is insanely good. Incredible performance top to bottom. She's incredibly strong in terms of how she delivers the vocals and how the vocals sit within these songs. It's not just an album that it's brutal sonically. This is an album that's extremely brutal vocally. And that performance really sets the tone for what that brutality is, and also with an incredible sense of consistency from start to finish. It's an album that has cohesiveness across all of its elements, sound-wise, vocally, and even how the lyrical content plays a role in what the overall brutality of this album it's all about. A very mature record by a band that clearly knows what they want. They want to push boundaries, they want to push the envelope, staying within their genre, but seeing how far they can take it, almost pushing it out of a lot of people's comfort zone. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Reborn to Kill once more. This is a great track, and it really showcases that more compact, dense sound that the guitars and drums offer, that low-end sound that the guitars and drums offer, making this a very heavy and thick track all around. But then you also have the snare and the cymbals with the drums pushing that movement upwards, which adds internal movement within the song, and it allows the track to feel a little bit more alive and not as repetitive. And I think this is a very important element, and is a core element that you're going to find throughout the entire record. Sonically, very demanding song, very brutal, really pushing it itself into the listener, and the vocals are a little bit more dynamic on this track. What you don't have from a dynamic standpoint, what you don't have musically, because there's really no ebbs and flows, it's just brutality, straightforward, putting yourself into the meat grinder. What you don't have musically from that standpoint, dynamically you definitely have a lot more to get out of this track from a vocal standpoint. The song never really loses its focus and what it's trying to do, but definitely adding those different elements vocally makes the song overall a lot richer. Then you have Ruminations. This is an instrumental interlude, and I think it's a really important track, not just because it's an instrumental interlude, but because of what it offers to the record. For a record that's 30 minutes in length, shortness of duration of the overall album plays an important factor. I mentioned this already, plays an important factor in the playability of the album. But having songs like this that sounds very different, still heavy, but it sounds a lot softer all around, a lot more manageable, a lot more bendable, if you will. It's a track that requires a lot less from the listener, so it allows you to almost switch off for a little bit, feel like you don't have to be in that meat grinder for the duration of this interlude. Really resets you for what the rest of the album is all about. So it's a track that plays a very important role because it works as an intro, but it also works as a break, as a reprieve of the overall brutality, and not just the overall brutality, but how balanced that brutality is throughout the entire record. So having a song like this definitely allows the listener to recharge the batteries, get prepared, and offering a more guitar-centric sound, also offering a richer guitar-centric sound with some even prog elements, definitely showcases that this band is not just about density, it's not just about heaviness, it's not just about brutality. They have a lot of different tools that they can use, and this track sonically is very different from the rest of the record, but it really helps the design of the album as well. Last but definitely not least, their Melted Remains, a song that expands and contracts constantly. That is the uniqueness of this song. If you look at the sound of the track, if you look at the vocal approach on this song, you're going to find pretty much a pattern that stays true throughout the entire album with a few caveats here and there. So what allows this song to be different is that sense of sound expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. I really like that aspect of the track because it allows everything else to stay exactly the same as you've seen throughout the record, but allowing this movement to exist internally makes the song feel different, not necessarily sound different, but feel different. And that is a very important aspect, once again, in order to break the record, in order to give the album some changes so that the album doesn't feel like one song that is constantly on loop for 30 minutes straight. So this track definitely has a different ability, and it definitely showcases a different approach, and that's what really sets it apart. This is it, Stabbing Eon of Obscenity, once again out January 30th on Symphony Media Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll see you all at the next one. Take care, guys.